The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now you're welcome along. Sunday Papers coming at you. Plenty going on, as you can imagine. The Dubs are all over the back pages after yesterday's win against Monaghan. So picture here of James McCarthy, who's been extraordinary all year and continues to do his thing. The final frontier, Dublin beat Monaghan to reach first to All-Ireland final since 2020. 117 to 13 points. Slightly deceptive scoreline if you didn't see the game. They were level on 60 minutes and then the Dubs did their thing. And then beneath that, Duncan Castles has PSG are now ready to join the race for Harry Kane. So Kane has agreed terms, it seems, with Bayern, but PSG are about to get involved, and it seems Harry Kane has a double your money offer from Spurs on the table, but that Daniel Levy says Castles will absolutely sell him this summer if no deal is agreed. He's not letting him go for free next year. So that's the Sunday Times. The Sunday Independent have a picture of Brian Fenton. Quiet-ish first half, only ish, but second half, and particularly in those final 10-15 minutes, he came to the fore as he tends to do. Fenton fires Dublin to final, and Dermot Crowe writes that the rock goal put the gloss on finish for Farrell's men. Next we have Sunday World, Rocky Road to Dublin. That's again yesterday's win, 117 to 13 points. Costello, the star man, with Dean Rock's late goal finally seen off. Brave Farney Army is the lead there. Sun Sport has Desi Farrell looking ahead to the final, but also next plan up, Vera, we have scenarios ready if Denise is injured. This is Vera Pow, who will come to in a few moments' time, talking about potentially, and it is only potentially, the loss of Denise O'Sullivan after the abandoned game against Colombia on Friday night, where she picked up an injury. Not a fracture is the good news. Then we have the Mail on Sunday, that James McCarthy picture again, where he's screaming at full time to the sky, and it's Dublin 117, Monaghan 13 points. Monaghan make Dubs earn place in final, and Mark Gallagher Pow tries to remain positive after Columbia chaos and injury to O'Sullivan. So they are your back pages. Very happy to say we have John Greene in, editor of the Sunday Independent Sports section, and Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. You're both very welcome.
Thank you.
On Dublin Meath, both winning yesterday at Croke Park. Decent semi-final between Monaghan and Dublin, level after 60 minutes. I think they were level 6 times throughout. Monaghan never actually took the lead, and before that, Colm O'Rourke and Meath, the Tailteann Cup champions. Joe Brawley writing about it here on page 2 of the Sunday Independent. He notes that Colm O'Rourke conducted his some, to be fair, of his post-match interview in Latin. When he was asked how Meath would celebrate, he said nunc est bibendum, which means now is the time for drinking. And he pays tribute to O'Rourke as a man who'd been written off as a bit of a dinosaur pre-game, not least next to Conor Laverty, who Brawley says is a thoroughly modern coach, expert in the blanket defensive counter-attacking system against Colm. A dinosaur hopelessly lost in the helter-skelter of the 80s, 90s. But Brawley basically says that O'Rourke has a certain trust in his players to be brave. Like Brian Cody, he trusts his players, he treats them as adults. And Brawley, who has talked about this kind of thing ad nauseum, really, the endless rehearsal and constant instruction which creates fear is replaced by Colm O'Rourke with an encouragement to go out and give life a bloody go. So in this second half, they played brilliantly, thrilling football, all adventure, long kicking, dramatic, high catching, points from distance. Jack Flynn scored 4 monstrous points high up over the block, reminiscent of a young Colm O'Rourke. No greater compliment will ever be paid to the boy. So that's his general sense of O'Rourke. Just a big tribute to the dinosaur who actually knows a thing or two.
I'm not sure who. I'm not sure who on the team last night in the paper came up with the headline "O'Rourke fluent in the language of football." But obviously, Colm was a columnist for us for many years, 30 years or so, and that sums him up perfectly. He eats, sleeps, and breathes football, but he does it slightly differently, I think, and he has been portrayed a little bit as a dinosaur. And actually, Joe was meant to be writing a piece about solely focused on the Dublin match last night, but he rang and said that he'd like to do a little bit about Colm as well, which was fine. and he captures them really well. He says, "I've toured the corridors of St. Pat's in Navan, the school where Colin was principal up until this year, in the company of Colin, and enjoyed his easy, mischievous relationship with the kids and staff and their obvious affection and respect for him." I've done that tour as well, and it's incredible to see the way he interacted with the teachers and with the students, and there was a very obvious affection, and there was always a bit of mischief there. And famously, on every Friday afternoon, he sent an email around to all the parents of the kids in the school. There was a sort of a passing itself off loosely as a newsletter, but which was always full of devilment and jokes and crack, and he just has that easy way with him, and that translates into how he's training this Meath football team. Meath have been pretty, on a downward spiral for quite some time now, and I spoke to him after he took the job, and he said the first thing he intended to do was to go in and get them to enjoy their football again. And you can see it yesterday with the team, the way they played and with the way they celebrated winning the Tailteann Cup. Some years ago, people in Meath might have thought that the Tailteann Cup was beneath them, but not anymore. They know where they are in football's pecking order, and happy that they have a group of players and a manager that they think can start the journey back to where they're challenging Dublin and Leinster. Yeah. He just has a different attitude to football, I think, than a lot of people. And I know he gave a presentation. They had a meeting several months ago with the players, and there was a PowerPoint presentation, and even the thoughts of him doing a PowerPoint presentation kind of seems a bit odd, but he did the PowerPoint presentation about what they were planning and what they were going to do. And he didn't tell me this, it was somebody else who was at the meeting, but the final point, and his last point before he signed off was, and remember fellas, enjoy yourselves and enjoy life. And I don't think we see enough of that, and we certainly haven't seen much of that in Gaelic football this summer.
No. 2023, Sean Boylan and Colin O'Rourke are still at the helm of Meath football. I
met Sean recently, and I'd known him quite well. He's a relation of my wife's, and I'd say he just can't believe that he's here and he's back again, and he's sitting in a dugout in Croke Park, and apparently talks a lot to the players, gives talks, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes. And sometimes you'd wonder about the kind of the dynamic now between young people and sort of somebody who's in his 70s, and he's adored by the squad, and he brings something different, just as he did all those years ago, first time around.
Another good winner for the Tailteann Cup.
Yeah, it's a good start for the good 2 years for it, isn't it?
Yeah,
and proof that the Tailteann Cup was absolutely needed. The idea that there shouldn't be two tiers in Gaelic football was as for some time now has clearly been outdated.
Yeah. Just on the Dubs to finish off that Joe Brolly piece. 60th minute they are level at 12 points apiece, and then Fenton scored a point, and then Dubs another turnover of a defender, and then they win the next two kickouts, and suddenly they're 3 points up, and then the goal happens and it's done. He says the Dubs played below their best for most of the game. They looked ordinary at times, dull and lethargic. Most of them will be annoyed how they played. They underestimated Monaghan, they disrespected them. They'll be bristling for the next fortnight. As Mickey Hart said on the BBC, the perfect way for them to reach the final. That was kind of the atmosphere yesterday.
They were like the last 20 minutes, weren't they? They were they trading on memory almost? They just that those experienced players, James McCarthy, Jack McCaffrey. I thought Fenton really in the last 15 minutes took the fight to them. Obviously Cormac Costello, who's still in his 20s, late 20s, but had been consistent all through. But those big guys, Mick Fitzsimon's fullback, three of those guys are chasing their 9th All-Ireland medal, and it felt like the old boxers just trading on instinct and trading on memory and going to the well one more time now in the final.
Yeah, it has that feel. So that's the sense of the GAA yesterday. Kerry against Derry is on the menu today. The other story, which is in all the back pages, is the Irish team over in Australia, Vera Pauw's quotes. So, for instance, here on the back page of the Mail, Pauw tries to remain positive after Columbia chaos. Vera Pauw insisting she doesn't regret choosing Columbia. Denise O'Sullivan suffered a bad shin injury following a challenge in the 19th minute of this behind closed doors match, and Pau says they have some hope she might make the Australia game. The situation is going to become much clearer in the next 24 hours or so. She said that Ruisha Littlejohn had been the victim of a head-high challenge a couple of minutes before the O'Sullivan tackle, and it was on that basis that they decided to end the match. There's a more detailed piece inside which I'll come to in a second, but general thoughts, Dan, this build-up to this World Cup has, and it's something Eamon Sweeney touches on as well in his piece, from the Celtic Symphony after the qualification to the Athletic report last week, and now an abandoned game. It's not kind of this straightforward, this is just a wonderful story, history in the making for this Irish team kind of a vibe. That kind of that straightforward feel-good factor hasn't actually been there, and 8-9 months ago you would have anticipated that.
Yeah, no, it's, look, I mean, I suppose when you know you're doing the papers this week, it's the Sunday before the first game, and you know there's going to be a lot of coverage naturally, and there is like some good pieces out there, you know, just sort of, you know, Dave Kelly with Lily Ag, and there's a Neve Fatty piece, and the Mail
has this pull-out section here, so there's that kind of
there is a lot of
aspect.
that stuff, but it does seem, and I know quite a few of the sort of lads who are working down there, that it's proven far more eventful than sort of anticipated, because it is this historic moment, and you probably would have expected that the build-up at this stage would have all just been, in the nicest way possible, more of the same of what you're talking about there. This is a wonderful, but I mean, the story is the story. I mean, it's an evolving story even now, even for the sake of the Sunday papers today. Like, it's evolving overnight, because even since these papers have come out, the footage of that Denise O'Sullivan tackle is now doing the rounds. I think the people covering at the moment are now trying to ascertain, can they get more footage of that game, because these Vera Pauw quotes are incredibly strong. I mean, you look across the papers, and as you mentioned, you know, the level of aggression in the Mark Gallagher piece, Pauw insisted that she had never seen a level of aggression like it in her 47 years in the game. And you know, there's Paul Rowan profile of Vera Pauw, I mean, which again sort of sketches out the colourful football life that she has lived, and she's seen a lot of things in the football world, and has been in a lot of sort of fraught situations. And you know, across the paper, she's talking about, you know, the Littlejohn challenge like nothing she's ever seen before. But since this has happened, I presume the Colombians at a point have decided, well, let's sort of leak out a little bit of footage here. I don't know how it's actually come to get out there into the public domain. And I'm not saying it's a great challenge on Denise O'Sullivan, it's a bad challenge, but maybe the initial view of it doesn't quite fit the image of what we've seen. And I suppose you step back from it. I mean, the Irish team were taken off the pitch in a game after like 23 minutes, with Vera Pauw talking about, you know, Jonathan Hill, the CEO, getting a call back in Dublin from Mark Canham, the director of football, which is a sort of a mad situation in itself if you think about it. Should we take the players off the pitch in this match here? So, I mean, in terms of a preparation for a tournament, I'm not going to say it's disastrous, right? But it's definitely
bumpy.
A really bumpy road, because anyone who's watched the team will know that O'Sullivan is, you know, she's their best player, the most creative player, and you know, along with Katie McCabe, but O'Sullivan is the heartbeat of the team, really. And you see I think it was the Mirror, I think, have a photograph of her in a protective boot, and it's like concerning. But there's probably a story around it now too that you could do without, that you're now almost may have to at some point come out and justify the decision to take the team off in the match, or explain it in some way, because, you know, is there footage going to get out there that challenges the version of events? So it's not ideal. Like, it's a great news story, this team getting to the World Cup, but I mean, myself and John spoke about it a little bit outside. I mean, you go to a tournament or you go to an Olympics, and things happen. You know, and it never quite always fits the bill of how you imagine it in the sort of the picture book of the mind when you qualify, relative to, in actuality, life happens, and they're really experiencing that.
Mark Gallagher's piece in the Mail on Sunday is very good. It charts the entire journey to the Colombia game. Ireland had watched Colombia in their previous 7 games. This wasn't what they had expected. And as you said, Dan, Pau insisted she had never seen a level of aggression like it in her 47 years in the game. She saw genuine fear in the eyes of her players as they were concerned about missing out on the biggest moment of their career. As you say, the director of football from the FAI, Mark Cannon, was just off a flight and he went to the game. He was a few minutes late for kickoff, but he was there, and then they got on the phone to Jonathan Hill. As for the Colombians, they are not best pleased with how they've been portrayed. Their defender, Daniela Caracas, has suggested in a now notorious social media post that the Irish were little girls, and she said, let them eat SH1T. Now, Pau hadn't heard, says Mark Gallagher, what Caracas had said before yesterday's briefing with newspaper journalists, and she seemed appalled by those words. I'm sorry, what? A wide-eyed Paul replied. To be honest, I'm a bit shocked hearing this. Let's just say that maybe they were emotional too, is what Vera Pauw said. She said the game started normally, very normally. It just started up then in a way that had no turnaround. First, there was a huge challenge on Ruisha Littlejohn, a challenge outside the laws of the game. And she says, within 2 minutes, there was this challenge on Denise. So it was a build-up of this. She said that the Colombian bench did not instigate their players' aggressive approach. She had no issue with the bench whatsoever. She did say they were of little help in calming the situation. She says as well that the Colombian staff handled the situation really well. That's once the decision was made to end the game. They took their players off while we were discussing what we would do, and that was in the moment that we were in discussion with the referees. They also calmly left the venue, went to the bus and left. And it seems that the Irish squad at large played a full 11-a-side match afterwards, so the players did get the preparation. They did play a match. It was to ensure the few moments of madness, says Mark Gallagher here, didn't disturb preparation for Thursday's clash in Sydney with the Matildas. It remains to be seen just what the consequences will be of Friday's events on the World Cup. The reason the footage hasn't been uploaded is there's no obligation to do so because the match didn't conclude. So that's where we are. And look, it was put to Pau that players have had rough treatment before, not least O'Sullivan and McCabe, and she says it's not comparable. This was far worse. The Irish players have their first day off today since arriving in Brisbane, and Mark Gallagher says the sense was that they'll need it given the toll that the past 36 hours might have taken. Can I, not to pierce a good old media story, can I just offer the sense, I don't think this is a big deal in the slightest. I think the players have already forgotten about this. I think this is ancient history. I think this has no bearing on anything. And if Vera Pauw in a nothing match, effectively a training match, said, you know what, bit too hot for me, let's just wrap it up and go, fine by me. I'm like already over this. I don't see how this could have any negative consequences on anything.
Well, as long as Denise O'Sullivan is fit to play the first game.
Sure, but Pauw's decision to wrap up the game, which is the controversy, I think it's.
But if you touched it there, the whole thing feels odd. It just. Yeah, the whole thing feels odd, and the messaging coming back feels odd. And we were living the moment, as I'm sure you were here through the weekend, trying to, find out what was going on and what was happening, and the updates we were getting back.
Put some flesh on the bones of odd.
The journalists were allowed to go to the game, and then they got there and they were locked out, and then the game starts, and then it's abandoned after 19 minutes or 23 minutes, and there was 2 yellow cards or there wasn't. There was a bad tackle, and then you look at the footage, and you almost had this, as I said to you before we started, it was almost, we had this image in our heads of somebody coming hurtling through the air, flying with a dangerous tackle. It looks like there was a bit of a tackle, and a foot looks like it might have been left in. But
very much within the norms of a game of football tackle.
I'm a manager. It's a few days beforehand, and I say, she's after getting injured. I don't want any more injuries. Let's just call this now. This actually isn't going to do what I wanted it to do. So it's better we just have a training session. So what? That's a good idea. Yeah. Let's do that. And a lot of the problem to me, coming at this from a media and trying to decipher it, or for Dan, is the lack of information almost. There was a picture going around of somebody took of her wearing a moon boot in the hotel that maybe shouldn't have been taken or maybe should have been taken. They don't want it out. They do want it out. Just tell us what's happening. Draw a line under it and move on to the next thing. But instead it's just been this drip, 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 drip. And it all goes to make something that's not that extraordinary into something that appears to be extraordinary, and the only thing we really care about is our best or second best player injured for Thursday or not, or has she a chance of making it or doesn't she? That's really all we want to know.
Yeah, like I think, Joe, I wouldn't downplay it too much in the sense of, I know what you're saying about the noise around it, but like, Vera Pauw's whole reputation is around being very meticulous in terms of her preparation. Like this World Cup, this is a World Cup plan that's been sketched out from months back. They took on certain games. A big part, she's actually, I think, has a reputation for being very like sort of obsessed with the whole injury prevention and the minutiae of that. Raymond Verheyen has been working, who is people will be aware of in his past with Jurgen Klopp. So, I would imagine everything is done to the minute in terms of preparation and to get the pitch right. And if you have one game in the country before you play your match, and you have to take the players off the pitch after 23 minutes of it, and you have players probably like, they had to put out a message from Denise O'Sullivan on the social media accounts, which was a bit odd as well, because didn't even make reference to her well-being. It's become a bit of a distraction, I would say. So I know what you're saying. Like, that's no doubt what the FAI line will be now. We've forgotten about this already. We've moved on with it. But I mean, we'll see. So there's a history of Ireland in major tournaments as well.
But you can't bring that in.
No. You're not. You've jumped in before I finish my sentence.
All right.
Can I finish it? Do you know what I was going to say there? I was talking about playing players with injuries, and having that real stress. Like, think of Ireland in the Euro 2012.
But that's every team. That's every. That's life.
But I think you're suggesting that this hasn't been unsettling, like that this is forgotten about. I don't think it's forgotten about because Denise O'Sullivan's gone round in a boot.
I think Denise O'Sullivan being injured is very unsettling, but that can happen in a training match, it can happen in a training session, or it can happen in a competitive match. It's happened here. It's very unfortunate. It's nobody's fault. Like, that's life. Players get injured. I don't get the sense of like this is a great distraction or issue, like the calling off of the game.
So you don't think
Denise O'Sullivan's injury is a massive.
You don't think
pity.
when Pauw's like doing her pre-match stuff for the Australia game, there's some Colombian not going to be there asking about, this is, you've shamed our country, all this noise. I don't think it's helpful. I'm not saying it might be in some ways you can argue it's a great distraction because it takes the complete focus off the game in their own minds, and you can flip it. Like, they're about to play in front of 83,000 people on Thursday, whatever, the biggest game of pretty much their lives, and maybe they're not sitting around thinking about the enormity of this all the time. There's some other thing that they can get caught up in. You could spin that in a different direction, but there's definitely been an oddness, as John pointed out, to how the whole thing has played out.
Look, it's very unusual, and maybe it's excessive caution, but she's entitled to be excessively cautious 5 days out from a game. I just think, like, it's in the papers here, and it's unusual, so we're curious about it, and the behind closed door aspect means we didn't really see the game. But you forget, all the players saw the game. I wouldn't think they've post-traumatic stress based on the tackle on Denise O'Sullivan, and so I think it's a quick 5 minute, do you know what, not worth it, everyone. We just got the game called off. We'll move on. Everyone happy? Everyone happy. It's your day off tomorrow. Great. I just think we're intrigued by it because we weren't there. I can't see how this rebounds in any great way.
I wasn't suggesting it was going to rebound anyway.
What's the issue?
I think it's just it ties in with the fact that as we sort of presented this piece at the start, that it hasn't been the type of build up to the World Cup that you would have envisaged, and this has been another layer to it, and it just goes to show how you can have the best laid plans, but they just get thrown asunder by circumstances, and this is what they're dealing with now. And as with all these things, we may find out in time the impact they had, which could have been nothing at all, or else actually it has been, because they're trying to do it preppy. I know what you're saying about the O'Sullivan injury, but even just, I don't know, is it just the administrators down there are caught up with all this, oh God, back and forth with the Colombians and what's coming out, and
they've made their official
crisis
stance.
Management.
Let them eat
all
shit.
This stuff.
That's all the Colombians have to say about the situation.
What they've said. Well, have the Colombians got more to come? This footage of the game has been been burned somewhere or whatever. These 23 minutes that they're we all want to see these 23 minutes.
In 20 years, these 23 minutes will be legendary. What did you think of the tackle as well?
I just said it. I mean, we only have one angle of it.
Card.
We only have one angle of it. It looks like
not even a red.
Well, it looks like one where it's like you leave one in on someone.
Yeah.
As the old pro would say, you saw the chance there to leave something in. It doesn't look great, but as I said, when you've committed stuff to the record about the worst challenge you've seen in all your years previously, well then obviously the Colombians are probably going to say, I wouldn't mind seeing, let's see the footage of that too. But it looked like a bad challenge, but I agree with your view that I'm not sure if it's a red card challenge.
The wider issue, I suppose, and Eamon touches on it in the Sunday Independent, Eamon Sweeney, but it's everywhere, is this has just become some kind of a rolling mall of distraction after distraction now since the squad was named. There was Katie McCabe at that press conference before the France game was clearly very irritated. So it's more, I think it's probably more to do with this now, all these distractions and elements of bad luck that have been creeping into the, even in terms of the draw that they got. It's that kind of thing. And just to mention briefly on that vein, this is Nadine Doherty touches on this on the Independent, but Rory McIlroy in the Mail, just underneath Mark Gallagher's piece, is talking about we're a few days out from a World Cup. Where's the excitement? Where's the penetration into kind of everyday life of the fact that we have a team just about to go into a World Cup? And she talks about it appears that kids should be running around in their Sky branded jerseys with McCabe 11 or O'Sullivan 10 printed on the back, but it appears they can't because it seems impossible to get Sky jerseys in the junior sizes. So she's talking about spending a day last week running around from shop to shop trying to get gear that celebrates this team and its achievement. And she signs off by saying women's sport is constantly underestimated, and so it seems are the supporters. So these are the kind of things around this team that they're going to be oblivious of that, but this feeling that what is it, 4 days away now, 5 days away, for people who want to see women's sport become more visible and more mainstream, it feels like we're creeping ever closer to the possibility of an opportunity being missed to celebrate it properly. I just can't understand there isn't merchandise all over the place.
There's been some issue around that as well, Like I think, it's a good problem to have.
It is
relative to where the team has come from. When they couldn't even get appropriate gear for the team. So I suppose to have a situation where the fans are sort of that has come up.
But like the ad that's running on TV is a really, really powerful ad.
Yeah, I think it'll ramp. I do think that this stuff will probably ramp up. I think the news cycle is shorter for a lot of things now, and I feel maybe the long build up, there's so much else going on. I can understand that to a degree. I feel like once we get to Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon, even maybe it's unusual that it might take till that first match, then people on Thursday morning are suddenly jarring to a standstill, and then suddenly it's there, and it's there. But as John alludes to, if Ireland you get a heroic result, you'd imagine there's more people looking for merchandise than the aftermath, and you can't satisfy that.
It's not that the players are invisible. Like, one of the great things about and the same applies to ladies football and to camogie. The players are extremely open and available to media in a way that isn't the same in men's sports. So these are visible. These are people that are easily identifiable that kids can kind of relate to. You just would fear that on the Sunday before a World Cup starts that it's very low key.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Dan. I think come Wednesday and then Thursday morning is going to be wall to wall. You'll turn on the radio, it'll be huge excitement, and then it'll kick on for the next 10 days after that.
So the real challenge, I think, is actually what happens after the tournament, but that's probably not a discussion for today. They're trying to sell a game in the Aviva, and probably off the back of this, but I suppose there's possibly times in the year where you could have a women's international around that time, and there mightn't be anything in the Sunday papers. It's just the nature of it's we in this country, and as other sports now with the hockey teams and sort of women's rugby Six Nations winning teams, that you have your window, which everyone is great actually for getting caught up in the moment, but the real battle is the sustained discussion, and that's obviously maybe that's something at the end of the year we'll reflect on this Irish World Cup journey through that lens.
No, fair. And look, if there's no such thing as bad publicity, look at this, few days out, bit of something,
bit of drama, Joe,
stuck
bit of drama, bit of mystery.
As I said,
just like you're just like
I'm trying to play it down.
You're trying to play it down.
It doesn't. You touched on it. Doesn't even rank in our great sporting scandal, going.
No.
We just don't see. I was saying it outside. We just don't seem to be able to go anywhere for a big tournament without
something happening. Yeah.
Something going wrong.
Yeah.
Let's take a short break. Dan McDonnell, John Greene, staying with us. Back in just one moment. And you're welcome back. So we'll turn from World Cup to, I say this with trepidation, we won't spend too long on this. If you have had your fill of the Oireachtas this week, I get it. We've all had a lot of Oireachtas in our
I was
lives.
there, Joe, for 6 hours. So you talked to me about it. I'm sorry it was tough for you dealing with it for whatever, a couple hours on the show.
It was
You could have sat through the whole thing.
No. Oh,
and for my sins, I sat through it at home.
See, there was the Labour debate on football that morning as well, so it was a full day of it.
Well, Shane McGrath, I think, captures a general feeling out there, which is just that the politicians are of a certain standard in so many instances. So he's talking here about the Oireachtas Committee on the Future of Broadcasting, where, to be fair in the main, it was about GAAGO and the GAA. So the headline is lots of sob stories but little light. Grandstanding tales of the vulnerable allow politicians to ignore sports media issues. And I think this is just a point everybody will agree with pretty swiftly, and we can move on. So he mentions the Fianna Fáil TD, Christopher O'Sullivan. Again, I have to say, I thought this was a joke as well, that he was bringing this up as a serious point. But he said basically he brought up an elderly gentleman who was unable to access Cork Tipperary on GAAGO for whatever reason. He doesn't give the reasons, whether it was financial or technological, I don't know. But he had to watch the match in his son-in-law's home, and this was a great inconvenience. That is the end of that story. And then Matty McGrath, as Shane brilliantly says, reliably failing to stay in the same postal district as the topic, roared in the same committee about an older man who couldn't get into a club game in Tipperary because of the move towards a cashless payment. And Tom Ryan took a deep breath and had to inform Matty that, this had been the situation for a decade. But it was, I don't know, news to Matty, or he hadn't got over it yet, but he brought that up. And then, in fairness, Tommy Conlon covers it brilliantly as well on the Sunday Independent. The GAA, to their credit, have like a on the QT kind of a plan B in that instance, where if somebody comes up and they just have to pay in cash for whatever reason and they've no other way of doing it, Tom Ryan sort of probably didn't want to say it too loudly in case everybody starts doing it, although why they would I don't know, but he said, look, the plan there is we just let them in. So of the 2 million that they make in gate receipts, €15,000 comes from cash at turnstiles. And Tommy says it was a beating heart, a touch of compassion, a relic of old decency in the midst of all the computerised and dehumanised protocols of modern commerce. But that was exercise in Matty McGrath. And Shane basically concludes, for every TD or senator who had done their research and who was interested in answers, there's at least one who grandstands and plays the occasion for cheap points, easy attention. It's precisely how the political system engages with sport. They use it as a podium when times are good, and then when there's a controversy they howl in outrage and trip over each other in pursuit of the easiest, laziest points. And he mentions Brendan Griffin, the Kerry TD, talking about so many deprived children around the country not seeing David Clifford's pass. Shane writes, there is no way surely that an adult could believe that there are children whimpering about their inability to see the famed pass of the week. Not to mention they could have seen it in the highlights. I mean, the kids can see it. I watched the Sunday game as a kid. I survived if I didn't see the live game. And he concludes by saying, come the All-Ireland finals, the best seats in Croke Park will groan under the weight of delighted TDs and senators. Their access will be uninterrupted as they celebrate the glories of the GAA. I dare say, Dan, you share Shane McGrath's sense of frustration with so many of our politicians and their interactions with sport. Yeah,
because there was a football debate that morning as well, and it was a sort of a Labour motion, and some good points. But it is like it's like these American town hall presidential debates we watch, where it's like part of the thing is, well, I spoke to Denise, a 44-year-old in Idaho, and it's just like it's the same thing. So we need a case study. Everyone needs a case study, and I know John and others made the point this week. It's just the sheer frustration of these committee hearings, because there was an opportunity to have a lot of important discussions around this. Naturally, like, this is the power of the GAA, and particularly because it's almost the effectiveness of the GAA, as we know, is like it sort of touches every parish, and it runs in line with how our political system works.
Yeah.
They literally run hand in hand with this country, that your whole existence is based around, you know, all politics being local. So it was impossible for anyone to independently almost contribute to debate in very general terms, and move it on. Like, there was the odd sort of TD who would come in with some sharp questioning, which was quite effective. I think Alan Dillon was mentioned.
Alan Dillon being a good example.
And we've seen a lot of people even who may not have watched this, but they've watched the Tupperty stuff, the RTE stuff, you know, can get a flavour of how it works. And there was Shane Castles was there, asked a couple of questions, and we might touch on it later around a different subject, because there was actually, like, TG Catter were there, and there was a couple of other broadcasting issues that I think could have been raised. Like, this is, I don't know when they're going to get all these people in a room again to talk about this, but of course it was pretty much there was for most of the politicians, it was like, well, it's a GAA issue, I need to be seen to be vocal on this, even if my point is exactly the same point as the person who spoke previously. And that's a shame, but I mean, this is how democracy works here, and that's what it was.
Their local office will clip up their question to the GAA, and it'll be all over local social media.
And like, even I think the point was made somewhere else this week, you know, like Brendan Griffin was certainly, it seems like any politician from Kerry definitely takes it in a particular direction, but I mean, everyone's at it. But he isn't even standing for election next time, so it's not even a sort of a long range election play. It's just like a condition that this is part where you have to bring it. But I mean, it's deeply frustrating, because I did feel like almost your frustration with it would almost cloud the fact that there was some interesting aspects teased out when it got to like specific viewing figures and information that eventually some people started to tease it out in the latter stage of it.
Well, Mick Foley's account on several occasions says they touched on something interesting here, but then it was never followed up on across several issues.
There's two elements to it, really. The first element is the Oireachtas committee itself, and how awful it. I mean, it's easy to kick politicians, but it was awful. And we have to remember that this was the same committee that had done quite good work, and for them in the large part asked excellent questions when RTE were in before them. All of a sudden you take sport and you put them in a room, and it's just this Gombianism takes over, and I don't know why, because sport is very serious. There's we spend a lot of money on sport.
I do understand that human nature of real politics, real issues. You're talking about the children's hospital, you're talking about money. Suddenly a game not being on TV, I can see, but that doesn't feel so important. There
are really important questions that are still outstanding. The RTE's appearance, like, there was people there, like, I don't know what the IRFU were doing there, because they just sat back and probably just watched everything happening around them. The FAI had a pretty easy time.
Did we mention we have a team in the World Cup final Friday and we're the number one team in the world?
They were just like, this is fine. The FAI had a little bit towards the end, but it was pretty much.
It was stuff came up, and because of the way it was set up, that somebody only had 4 minutes. You know, with some of them, thankfully, they only had 4 minutes, but with others, with someone like Alan Dillon,
you needed more time. Are we saying Oireachtas committee structures is the new championship structure?
So I'm going to move away from the Oireachtas committee structure, and the real important thing that they got to the door but they didn't go through it was this whole GAAGO.
Tommy
RTE.
Conlon sums up that, so I'll read what Tommy has and then you can give us your thoughts, John. The question is whether RTE in particular is not caught in a conflict of interest. This is towards the end of Tommy's piece, where he's charted the efforts early on which aren't good, but then this key point, he says Alan Dillon, who did do very well in fairness, didn't beat around the bush with Declan McBennett, RTE's group head of sport. Are you not cherry picking the top GAA clashes to drive profit and subscription at GAAGO, he asked. No, absolutely not, replied McBennett. And the defence of GAA, and I suppose by extension RTE, is that the CCCC choose the games. It's that simple. And Declan McBennett said, look, we have 31 championship games that are free to air. To be fair, 16 of those are predetermined, as in we have to show the provincial finals, we have to show semi-finals, we have to show finals. So actually there isn't as much choice as you would think. And RTE pays the piper, writes Tommy Conlon, but the CCC calls the tune. Therefore, when Kerry Tyrone was fixed for the Saturday, the broadcaster had no choice but to put it on GAAGO. The bumper payday that ensued was a happy but accidental dividend. Dylan says, but why can't you broadcast that game on a Saturday? Mick Bennett's reply, because the two games that were assigned to us that weekend were Sunday games. It's a CCCC decision, deputy. After further over and back between them, Dylan accuses RTE Sport of driving profit with GAAGO. Mick Bennett, I'm not, deputy. I do not accept that point. Dylan believes it's a valid point. Mick Bennett does not. Taw or Neil, we didn't have Hawkeye to decide on this one. The debate is moot for what remains of the season, but the punters who pay their licence fee will still be very much Neil in 2024. So that kind of, the nub of that issue is never fully eased out, or a conclusion is not quite reached. Declan McBennett adamant, look, CCCC pick the games. We get Sunday, GAA gets Saturday, nothing to do with us. It's all on the CCCC.
And I'm not having that.
Right.
Okay, and the reason I'm not having that is because, and I think if Alan Dillon had more time, he wasn't having it either, and I think I'm going to try and put words in his mouth, but where I think he was going with this is, there's two elements. One, why can't they show a game on Saturday? And there seems to be a resistance, not in RTE Sport per se, but in the institution of RTE to show live games on Saturday, unless they have no choice to, like an All-Ireland semi-final. But more than that, so Declan McBennett's argument was that once the draw was made, we applied to have two games, and they were Kerry and Tyrone and Dublin and Mayo. They were the two games that we wanted to show on the Sunday. CCC only fixed one of them for the Sunday, nothing we could do.
Yeah.
Anybody who watches the GAA or knows anything about how the GAA works knows that once that draw was made, there was absolutely no chance that Kerry and Dublin were going to be on the same double header. That just wasn't going to happen because of the logistics of the amount of people that want to actually go to the games.
Yeah.
So you're applying to show two games that you instinctively know are not going to be on the same bill.
Yeah.
So who benefits? So all you don't know when you're making that application is which game is going to be on Saturday and which game is on Sunday. That's where the CCC decision comes into. It could have been the Dubs on the Saturday and Kerry on Sunday, and Dublin would have been behind the paywall.
Yeah,
that's
out of this weekend, I suppose.
Yeah. So you instinctively know that that's what's going to happen. Who benefits? RTE benefits from either way because of its connection to GAAGO, and this is where we get to the nub of the problem, which is that GAAGO is absolutely here to stay and is a requirement, I think, if we're going to see more games of football and hurling being broadcast, whatever way, then GAAGO is a necessity. The question then is, which is what they didn't really get to, is why is it a 50-50 partnership with RTE? Why is it not a 100% GAA-owned product that is then farmed out in whatever way after that, and RTE may be required to broadcast some of the games, or some other production company whatever way it's done. Why does it have to be a 50-50 partnership? I don't know much about how the League of Ireland thing is structured, but that's very much an FAI.
It is now, yeah. Like the previous season
started out being a GAAGO.
That was a COVID thing. I wonder,
sports want to own their own rights, and the GAA and the other argument about we are required to show these 16 games. I would imagine that when RTE are in negotiations with the GAA for TV rights, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, they hold most of the aces because there's nobody else going to pay what they're going to pay or show the amount of games that they're going to show. And they're going to say, if Dublin and Mayo are playing a backdoor match on a Sunday and it clashes with Galway versus Leitrim in a Connacht final, we're not going to show Galway versus Leitrim in the Connacht final. Our audience will want to see Dublin versus Mayo in a qualifier game. Yeah. So this idea that there's a prerequisite on them to show certain games, I think, is an easy out as well.
He could be, I don't know. I feel on that point, and Declan McBennett can be quite convincing in terms of how he sort of deals with an argument. I would imagine that he probably is on, contractually is probably on solid enough ground there. I think there probably is a question about how the rights deals are structured, because I suppose maybe I'm coming at it from perspective of, say, okay, you look at the Premier League and it's like Sky and it's BT and it's packaged and it's bundled, and you have bundle A and you have bundle B. It does seem quite unusual that it's trying to get people's head around the fact that bundle A is with RTE and bundle B is, well, GAAGO, but they're sort of also RTE of a partnership, and that he's probably right on the basis of, if bundle B just happened to be with Virgin, then that would be RTE 16 games, so that's the way it would be. like, he's probably right to a point. To me, I just step back from it, coming at it very neutrally, and like not as a sort of a massive fan who is sort of looking at this situation of, I mean, you have 2 quarterfinals on a Saturday and neither of them are on TV, and this is highly unusual.
It is, yeah.
This is highly unusual.
I think that's an institutional thing for RT, though. Rather than a specific RT sports issue.
I think if you're doling out the package, surely to a point, I would have to put back a little bit and say, well, you know, what visibility will there be for these games that we're putting out there? And maybe it's just that people are learning, and they've now this Ferrari this year has highlighted things that can be easily fixed for next year. And maybe you can tweak some of these things to avoid it.
I think that will probably happen.
I would assume that's what's going to happen ultimately, because it's an odd one. You know?
Yeah, it's all just a little bit clouded as to how decisions are made. Like, I think, for instance, so there's a lot of focus on RTE, quite rightly, but I mean, Tom Ryan's point that, hey, listen, CCCC set the games. There's a Chinese wall here. We had nothing to do with them. They're totally independent. Well, think about that. So the CCCC are of the GAA. They know that the games on Saturday go on GAAGO. They know that GAAGO is owned by the GAA, and so the better GAAGO does, the better for everyone.
They're not totally independent.
Like, I don't think they're blind to the fact that if they put a game on Saturday, it's going to be on GAAGO. So I mean, the independent line,
the totally independent conjures up an image of that there's somebody from Stokes Kennedy Crowley brought in, and they're all internal GAA men and women.
CCCC will know GAAGO doing well is good for GAA. So actually, well, that's a juicy game. Kerry Tyrone. Will we put Kerry on the Saturday or Dublin? And so, like, their decision making has to be either consciously or unconsciously informed by the fact that they want GAAGO and the GAA to thrive, so they put certain games on a Saturday knowing they'll be on GAAGO. So I don't really buy we're independent. Like, we do. Geez, that was a shock to us. Was the Saturday game on GAAGO? We'd no idea.
It's incredibly inefficient, if that's the case. You know, like,
I think you're 100% right. You know, that's exactly.
There is influence.
So what's the point of GAAGO? And it probably has to be similar to the GAA's ethos in general, which is that there are times when it's going to show games that don't have a huge amount of public interest.
It should
and
be.
There are times when it will show games that are commercially viable that help it to make money.
And to be fair, that's a very difficult balance, commercially viable, because it's
but the GAA is doing that every day in pretty much everything it does, and it makes a lot of mistakes in doing it. It does some good things as well.
Yeah.
But when you get to the last 7 games of the Football Championship, 4 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, and finals. Should any of those games be on a streaming service? So I don't think so, and I don't think many GAA people would.
I was going to ask, well, do you think GAAGO should be just doing the lesser games that may only get an audience of 1,500 or 1,000, as we heard, and then once you get to anything that's in any way interesting, the GAA, and so by extension GAAGO, should genuflect and say free to air.
I'm only saying quarterfinals. I mean, let's say again, let's say Kerry and Dublin were drawn in a group stage match, and it's not on live TV. Like, that would be a very commercially viable game for GAAGO. I'm just saying, when you get to, there's 7 games left in the Football Championship, 4 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals and a final. I personally don't think any of those
should be free to air.
Should be free to air. Should be on GAAGO at that point.
I'd say a lot of people agree with that.
That would make sense. I guess is the argument, I presume it's a financial argument, that the commercially successful games in GAAGO help you to pay the costs of covering games that previously would have been 10 seconds highlights.
I'm not sure that
should that service be provided anyway independently?
I wouldn't be sure, and I mean, this is a question for RT, and again, this is something that could have been teased out and wasn't. What were the 2 games on the Saturday on GAAGO simply because RTE wouldn't show them live? Was it because there was nowhere else for them to go other than GAAGO, or was it that there was a contract? It was predetermined that there would be 2 Saturday games in the quarterfinals.
It seems to be predetermined by the contract. I think that seems to be the.
Interestingly, RTE said they take the profits from GAAGO and use them to buy Allianz League rights for RTE. So it's like
the whole thing is very
energy.
But a lot of it comes back to, I mean, like you see, like the monopoly to a degree that RSG has around sports coverage in this country, and not enough hours at times, or not enough room in the schedule. I mean, there's a broader debate. I mean, that's why I felt that this broadcasting discussion, and there was stuff later on where TG Catter were being asked, well, what would you like to do? And they were talking about, well, if we could get an extra 2 million, then maybe we could cover more. I think they were talking maybe more Women's League of Ireland and maybe more women's rugby. And this is the thing, like, you know, and this, I think there is a valid criticism of RTE around this. Some of the rights that they take up a lot of stuff, but then they don't necessarily have a home for
an outlet for it.
And it's you know, other stations clearly are trying to do things in a different way. Like, you know, the whole point about Virgin was, well, they don't want to do an outside broadcast per se of this stuff. They want to take, and I've seen that in the League of Ireland, for example. But there comes back to the whole issue of, well, the service for the viewer, you know, the old man somewhere, you know, that is presented by our politicians, that actually there is an issue around how much RTE have and where do you show it, you know. That's definitely
as Tommy Conlon describes them, the cohort of gentlemen are old enough to remember ordering McCardles in the bar and the ladies who enjoy the baby sham in the lounge.
We will take a short break. No more Rocktas talk for the rest of the paper round. You'll be paper review. You'll be glad to hear Dan and John staying with us. Back in just 1 sec. We're back. So let's push on. Dan McDonnell and John Greene are with us here in studio. A few pieces to touch on before we go. I'd say two characters, if they sat down for a beer one of the days, Wayne Rooney and Aiden McGeady, would swap a fair few good stories and have similar perspectives on different aspects of the game. So they're featured here in different papers. Jonathan Northcroft has had a very close relationship with Wayne Rooney for a number of years now in the Sunday Times. Helped him ghost his column and has interviewed him on occasion. And so he sat down with him once again, a check-in with Wayne Rooney. Like, it's a touch cliched for us to say that Rooney comes across very well in these pages in the Sunday Times, but he does, to be fair. I mean, he's really thoughtful about how he's making his way in the game. He's in just his third year managing. He's had two very different, difficult circumstances. He's over in Washington. I guess the jumping off point for this is that he's managing like an all-star MLS team against Arsenal on a pre-season match very soon, and he's just chatting to Northcroft about how things are going. I look at Wenger going into Japan. I look at Carlos Queiroz going to so many different countries. I'm not stupid and arrogant enough to think that I can go in it from scratch and manage at the top level. I feel like I've been going through a process and an education, and that with every game and every week I'm still improving and still loving it. And he's talking about a very multicultural dressing room at Washington. I've been reading stuff, watching lectures from Oxford and Harvard on race, understanding why people think in certain ways. Talks about the importance of religion, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, in Ramadan, for example, how you train Muslim players. These are all the things that Rooney is looking into at the moment. And talks about his current team. He has Christian Benteke actually as one of the players there. He's up front with Fountas. They play like Brighton. Split strikers, trying to stop the ball going to opposition fullbacks and keeping the game central. Our energy is in the middle of the pitch. I never thought I'd get Benteke to play as a split striker, but he's been great. And talks about his goalkeeper as well, who Rooney can tell you is in the top 2% in the world in terms of how high up the pitch he positions himself. So I said to our goalkeeper at the beginning of the season, someone will score from the halfway line against you because of what I'm asking you to do. And every single game, says Rooney, somebody tries. Don't worry, I told him, this will happen, but you've probably stopped 10 goals by playing sweeper, is what he said to him when he did eventually concede a goal by being lobbed. And something I hadn't heard of, and Jonathan Northcroft hadn't either. The discovery list is over in the States.
Yeah.
So Rooney's like, you don't know about the discovery list? Okay. He says, take Erling Haaland. We, in theory, could put Haaland on our discovery list, and it means that if he ever comes to the MLS, but let's say he wanted to play for one of the LA teams and not us, LA would have to pay Man City and us because we, quote unquote, discovered him. It's crazy, but if you're clever, you can make money. Last year, when Jesse Lingard signed for a year with Forest, we put him on our discovery list straight away because you thought there's every chance that after a year at Forest, he'll come to the US, and that would mean we'd get money or we get to sign him. I mean, that is just wild. It doesn't go into how many people you can put in your discovery list, but I mean, you'd be thinking about slapping every superstar in their 30s on it. Talks about treating players like adults. The previous coach at Washington had them kind of hold away on away trips. I let them go out, go to Starbucks, all that kind of stuff. And then on Messi, like, he paints a great picture of where the MLS is going. The Apple broadcast deal is worth $2.5 billion over 10 years, starts this season. It's huge. The other day, the two LA teams played out the Rose Bowl in front of 82,000. Everything is set up for Messi to kick on. He's got all his mates, Busquets and Luis Suarez potentially, and Jordi Alba, and so he may find it tough. A lot of the big players find it tough. The travelling, the different conditions, different cities. There's also a lot of energy and intensity on the pitch, so it's not necessarily easy, but he reckons soccer will pretty soon be right up there in the States and competing as the most popular sport. So that's him. I know, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Dan, I know you sort of felt, oh, it's another interview with Rooney taking the road less travelled. Yeah. And I get that, but it doesn't make it an unenjoyable read at the same time.
Yeah, no, it is enjoyable. I know in the context of it is there's another piece by Aiden McGeady who like Rooney, has probably been in the public eye, you know, from a very young age.
Yeah,
you know,
same vintage
football men, and Aiden McGeady definitely has more to him than people realise. You know, he's will be regarded as a real student to the game, really knowledgeable about sort of almost nerdish sort of interest in football, but sometimes you would see him, and I've experienced it, very spiky, short, punchy interview where you think, oh God, yeah. And I suppose Wayne Rooney has experienced that too, and let's be honest, you know, he's had some sort of off the field scandals in his life that would lead people to sort of perceive him in a particular way, and clearly America is allowing him to go about things differently, and it may actually sustain him in the game longer than some of his contemporaries, like, you know, Frank Lampard and the likes, who've gone quickly for jobs but may be burned out quicker by the experience. And I mean, America for him, and it's a bit like I don't know if people saw the Messi stuff during the week, like Messi moving unnoticed through a supermarket in Miami, you know, that you've probably spent your whole life in the pressure cooker environment of your every move, probably paranoid because of things that happened to you when you were younger. And now you get to this place where you can just sort of sit back, and, you know, MLS is crazy. Like I think it still exists now that you're only allowed to take a certain amount of charter flights across a year. You have to then otherwise fly, you know, commercial, and you have to and this is a big land for a lot of the players over there that suddenly they spent their whole life in this existence and they have to do things a bit differently. But actually some people seem to really respond to it, and Rooney, who has had opportunities I think to go and manage in England, is maybe, you know, he's talking about sort of reading stuff, watching lectures from Oxford and Harvard on race, and learning about the different personalities in his dressing room, that maybe it will stand to him to the long run, or maybe he'll come back to England, lose a job after 3 months and just be chewed and spat out by the machine. Like, it could be that either.
I suddenly, when you mentioned that, found myself thinking of the scene in Succession where Brian Cox, who's not a sympathetic character, Tom turns to him after one ordeal and says, and I had to fly commercial. Yeah. And Brian Cox says with real sincerity, Tom, I'm really sorry to hear that. I mean, I'll ruin your life, but you shouldn't have to fly commercial. I
read these pieces. I read them back to back. Actually, I read the Rooney one first, and I actually enjoyed it. Like Dan says, he seems to be doing everything he thinks he can do to be. He wants to be a really good manager, and he wants to. He doesn't want to get the handy gigs, or he wants to work at this, but. Then I read the McGeady one, and actually the link that struck me between the two, because the most interesting line in the McGeady one was when he was talking about all the managers he's worked for, and he said, I understand when you become a manager that you have to exert authority, but I've seen managers doing so many things that annoy players. Why would you want to annoy players? You should get them on side. And I thought, yes, okay,
point.
it's a very simple point that only a player obviously can understand. That Rooney seems to be kind of innately following that path of trying to understand what it is his players need.
McGeady, the theme in the McGeady piece, it's in The Observer, so this comes from a UK angle, which kind of makes it interesting in its own way. So basically, McGeady is 37 and has been injured for a year, but is still desperate to keep playing, and he's looking for a new club. I'm not as quick as I used to be over 40-50 yards, but I can still get beyond people and get a shot or a cross away. I'm proud of still being able to play. And he was with Hibernian last season, and he's not sure where he's going to end up. And it charts his career, and there was obviously the move to Russia, and then he struggled at Everton, burst on the scene with Celtic, and he does say of managers generally, Martin O'Neill underappreciated as Ireland manager, as was Trapattoni. His attention to detail incredible. Martin might feel disrespected by people saying he's an old school manager. He is, compared to nowadays, which is kind of like, it's buried in there, but like he is saying, Martin O'Neill is an old school manager. Man management's what he does best. It has changed so much in my 20 years. The dressing room I came through at Celtic was a tough school. You'd get pulled up in front of HR if a lot of that stuff happened now, which is kind of, that Vera Pauw stuff from the other week is kind of that beginnings of HR and dressing rooms interacting, which is kind of going to be an interesting space over the next decade or so. But it's funny how the UK looks at him. So it starts off, Ewan Murray's piece, by saying Aiden McGeady is one of the most talented Scottish footballing exports of a generation, but destined never to be regarded as such. His decision to represent Ireland had the strange knock-on effect of deleting his name from conversation regarding the finest products of youth systems, in this case Celtic. So the perception in Scotland is like erased from history. What's the perception of McGeady in Ireland with his 93 caps? I was sort of surprised it was 93.
Two figures that caught me there. 93 caps, and he's 37. I would have had him as older as well.
Would you? Yeah, no, yeah. The age power makes sense to me because he was one of those just come on so early on the scene. But yeah, the 93 caps is true. Yeah, it's
name his moments. The goal
in Georgia.
Yeah, after
the goal in Georgia. He underrated role in Robbie Brady's goal in Lille that completely gets forgotten. I was always more in that he got on the ball and he was quite brave, and he got the ball moving, and it sort of set the wheels in motion for the ball getting to Hula. And he can watch it back. He came off the bench in that game.
Could you give me 5 moments top of your head?
Some of them might involve him like kicking off at people in press conferences as opposed to
on the pitch.
But I'd have to think about it. They would be the ones that would obviously spring to mind,
because I feel the perception of McGeady amongst Irish football fans would be the goal to Tbilisi. In fairness, probably like unfairly drew groans around the Aviva when he would be brave enough to try and make something happen, and it mightn't come off. But then allied to that a sense that never kind of, all the talent was obvious to see, the technical ability was so obvious to see, and yet, geez, did he ever fire for Ireland the way he might have?
Yeah,
that sense of regret,
maybe a victim of the early expectations around him, because how much excitement there was around Aiden McGeady when he was 18. Like, he was a huge, like I'd say, like he was a huge name even in sort of like British football at that stage, when it was sort of compared to Ronaldinho and all this, and he really was like. And as I said, I always admired. He went to Moscow. He went to Spartak Moscow. Like, he learned the language. He like tried different things in contrast to the typical footballer who wouldn't go that road. But yeah, I kind of wonder, like, you look at now, like Mikey Johnston come on, like, against Gibraltar, and he now probably has a role in this Ireland squad because he tries something and there's probably few like him, whereas McGeady at the time was, most of his Ireland career was spent under Trapp, I guess, maybe the prime of his career, when it was quite a rigid system, and maybe he just, at times he would be denigrated, but there were times he didn't play as well as he could have either, let's be honest. But it's like Jeff Hendrick. Sometimes these lads that have a lot of caps that have been around for a long time, they just become whipping boys at a point, which isn't always fair. But 93 caps, but he disappeared almost out of sight. Could I tell you? Do you remember what his last game was?
I was just about to ask you. When was his last
I'm pretty
game?
sure it was the 5-1 against Denmark.
It says it in the piece.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so like he just, like, himself and Wes Houlihan come on at half time in that game, and that was basically the end for them. It was that crazy sub, the Martin O'Neill change, which he sort of broke spoke from his personality and really went for it, you know. But it's funny he mentions about him and O'Neill. You know, he's like, him and O'Neill were at each other all the time.
I can imagine
that was the dynamic of their relationship, and they both thrive off a bit of natural conflict with people. And that's like, you know, you kind of have to laugh at the McGeady point. You know, I think I'm perfectly easy to manage if things are done properly. I'd say you could roll out a list of his former managers
who didn't do things properly.
who would maybe take a different view. But I think he is someone who could surprise people in the coming years in terms of as a commentator and as a voice on football. I think we'll hear more from him.
You picked a pretty interesting piece here, back page of the Sunday Times. It's Don McLean on the potential gambling legislation. So generally in the main, any piece now on gambling in the papers is very much against gambling and the promotion of gambling in absolute terms, whereas Don McLean here is talking about this new gambling legislation, which has been like coming for a very long time, and it's finally here. And it like to be fair to Don, he is talking about this in generally positive terms, and he says like the start of a gambling regulatory authority of Ireland can only be a good thing. So it's not that he doesn't acknowledge the serious ills that gambling can bring to lots and lots of people's lives. He mentions Micheál Martin talking about this gambling bill. He says it introduces serious new safeguards to protect people from falling prey to gambling addiction, while also balancing the freedom to enjoy responsible gambling. So Don says the spirit of the bill is to protect children, protect the vulnerable, and that makes a lot of sense. To that end, however, one aspect of it is banning all gambling advertising on television between 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. And his worry is that will have far-reaching consequences for Irish racing. In particular, the two dedicated horse racing channels have both said that they'll really struggle without gambling advertising. Now, he does disclose, Don, that he is in gainful employment in racing TV, but he still says there is an argument that for the dedicated horse racing channels, they should be viewed differently to the advertising you might see on Virgin or TG Cahir or RTE at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So his worry is the likes of Racing TV and Sky Sports Racing, their audiences are in the main over the age of 24, and he thinks if you damage this 2.4 billion euro worth of the economy, industry employs 30,000 people, it's the damage to the TV channels is that you mightn't have the same sponsorship of racing if they go under or they can't show racing. Basically, an exception should be made for the dedicated racing channels, but fair enough, RTE and Virgin and those more mainstream channels. That's his argument in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. This did come up during the week in the Oireachtas, ironically enough. As I mentioned, Shane Castle's raised it, and the Sky person who otherwise was like, shouldn't even have been there, you know, because everyone was having their GAAGO questions. But they were talking about it. I mean, and I know that in the sort of the racing industry publications across the week, they've been series of columns about this. Ted Walsh rolled out, this is a massive threat to the sport. Ruby Walsh in the Examiner yesterday, again quite similar in tone, and referencing these Deloitte stats again on the contribution to the economy to 30,000 jobs. A lot of them are people in betting shops, ironically enough, so and I suppose I'm interested in this because we've been doing a lot of stuff around the betting tax and the racing's relationship with the government this year. I mean, there's been something going on recently with the IHRB, the regulatory body of HRI. They've been in the Oireachtas for some very unusual hearings around exit packages for former employees, and can't really get into that today. But I guess the broader point is that I suppose racing administration, the relationship with government is crucial. It underpins how it's funded, how it exists, and yet it does appear in this instance here that they're going to need a massive favour again to avoid a situation that is quite a serious one, because it is laid out. I mean, if you can't advertise gambling on TV between 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m, I mean, you watch, as I do, because I subscribe to the racing TV channel and I watch a lot of racing, and people know who watch these shows what the ads are comprised of, and it's
vast majority gambling.
And I know this is a big thing around football too, and there was a story during the week I think one of the Irish Bookmakers Association it was put out there, I think, in the Irish Times, that Premier League broadcasts in Ireland could potentially be taken off the air, because as we know, in the ads of a Premier League game you will see a lot of ads, and if they're taken out of the equation, I mean, who's going to fund the coverage and the sponsorship of the coverage of some of these sports? You know, media rights deals are very valuable. That's been an issue recently, and this is something that's probably quite a serious story sort of bubbling under here, and the political world wasn't that energised by during the week because they have other stuff to be going on, but you feel that in time this might become a thing, because if this legislation is applied as it's been laid down, then there is going to be real problems for racing here. But in saying that, for a government's perspective, if you introduce legislation but then you have to get to a point where you make a dispensation for racing channels, that's a tricky one too, in the context of how people are becoming a lot more aware to the problem gambling issue and how you treat it. And I know, again, there seems to be a briefing line that's going out there. Well, Sky Sports Racing reports that 97% of its audience is over 24 years of age. I mean, that may be true, but they don't all watch it in a room on their own.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
kids
I've raced all the time, and people coming in the house will see it, so that seems to me, being a racing industry, we're struggling here. We really need to lobby hard at this point to avoid what is going to be a very serious situation. And I think I'm not sure if there's much more to add on top of it, other than to say that it is going to be interesting, because there's probably a lot more eyes now on the government's relationship with the racing industry. And if you sort of, it's a powerful lobby, but I don't know how you easily make this one go away without it attracting a lot of commentary.
In general, as a society, we're slowly, very slowly, some would argue, moving towards taking a certain position on gambling. Yeah. And we started off the show today talking about Colin O'Rourke, and he has spoken and written in the past about his experience in St. Pat's in Navan is an all-boys school, his experience of seeing the evolution of gambling and online gambling through young men, and the problem that it represents for kids that he knows and knew in school. So we're moving, in one instance, we're moving towards a position where I think we're going to end up with gambling being very much frowned upon in society. But separate to that, and gambling funds Irish racing at the moment. I mean, that's basically what happens. Okay, the money comes in on the betting tax into Central Pool, but the same amount of money roughly goes back out to horse racing and greyhound racing. And I would think that if you're involved in racing, be it in any way as your livelihood, and at the top or at the bottom of it, I would say that there are so many things coming at racing at the moment that you're really feeling under attack. This is just one of them. There's the whole welfare issue in the UK, which is really, really starting to affect the views of racing there. I mean, we had, was it 12,000 at the Derby in the Curl?
Oh, yeah, just 14 maybe, or really poor attendance at the Irish Derby.
Half what it used to be, less than half what it used to be. It's a sport that's really, really under siege, but it does have and has had in this country and in the UK a very, very cosy relationship with the state, and I think that kind of the extent of that cosy relationship, as Dan has said, is under threat. There are things happening behind the scenes. There are scandals happening behind the scenes that are slowly starting to bubble to the surface. There's the whole issue around doping, which we've been looking at in the Sunday Independent, and you just feel that racing as a sport is just coming under the microscope at a time now that it may become a very uncomfortable period for them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Just to mention, by the way, I meant to mention it at the outset, it's not in the sports sections, but just before the clock comes against us, it's about John Delaney, and it's Mark Tighe writing about him. So former FAI chief John Delaney recruits Irish directors for string of firms selling products from CBD oil to adult entertainment. This is just a piece on John Delaney's post FAI life and his current business dealings. So Mark Tighe says John Delaney is recruiting Irish contacts to become directors of brass plate style companies for overseas businesses involved in selling cannabis oil and other e-commerce schemes for €3,000 a year. He said to potential people he's trying to recruit. It's money for jam. It's a Sunday independent investigation. It seems Delaney has helped recruit some 10 Irish people as directors for companies that want to basically sell goods and process payments from bank accounts and companies based in Ireland. He insisted to potential suitors that it is 1,000,000% legitimate. It seems that Mark Tighe has hold of voice notes and WhatsApp exchanges. In one message, he boasted about meeting Social Protection Minister Heather Humphreys at a €195 a head black tie event in London. Great lady, said Delaney in the voice note. She came over to me at a function and said hello, which is very good of her. Top woman. In a separate message then, Delaney said to somebody, a quick one for you. I have a scheme that can make you £3,000 a year and 500 quid that will help with any introductions you give. It's directorships of companies in Ireland. You can't have been a director of a company before, that's all. So a lot of my mates are doing it. It's 100% legit, by the way. I wouldn't put it to you otherwise. Text me if it's of interest and I'll send on some stuff to you, followed by a Zoom call. And then he followed that up later by saying, just a quickie, did you have a look at the proposal? Give me a shout today. It's money for jam, pal. Give me a shout back. Your main duties involve reviewing and signing any necessary documents that may be required and providing them back via email or post. The Sunday Independent approached Delaney's solicitor for a comment, but no surprise, and it touches again in broader terms then about his post-FAI business dealings. He's set up life as a business consultant in the UK, works through his company Delay Limited, and has had a baby girl with a new partner. He's under investigation, as we know, by the Corporate Enforcement Authority in Ireland for suspected company law breaches during his time at the FAI. That's currently stalled due to a 3-year legal battle over access to emails, which again is ongoing in the courts. And in recent months, he's worked with a number of UK football clubs on a commercial basis. He was at a Birmingham City corporate golf weekend in Marbella earlier this year. Hibernian's head of commercial thanked him recently for helping a link between Hibs and the Omnia Group services to provide outsourced payroll work. So an array of different dealings in the commercial world. And the piece finishes by saying, by the way, spokesperson for Heather Humphreys said there was no meeting with Delaney in March. The minister was in attendance at an Irish function in London during her St. Patrick's Day visit. She passed the concerned individual's table and said hello. The extent of the engagement was about 30 seconds, which is fair enough. And it's I'm not really sure the point of it in some ways, but I suppose John Delaney's off making a new life for himself as he sees fit. This is one of the avenues. This is it. I suppose a lot of people, there's massive public interest in this, of course, and it's like, people have the curiosity what happens next, yet behind it all, I suppose people in football is a frustration of this, the stalled 3-year legal case that's gone nowhere almost in a way. You're waiting for something to happen, and again, early this week you have this big debate in the Dáil, or a debate which reflects how football is playing catch up majorly, because as has been highlighted football was sort of no idea how to go about getting funding, because all of it was being funneled through the cult of the personality of he was the man who could make it done. And it's almost like there's almost a weird reflection of that there, where again he's talking to people in the amateur football community about something that was almost how the game operated here to an extent. It was through this, and the game in this country is looking for what people consider eye-watering amounts, but it's a product of just how it couldn't work the system for so long. Anyway, so there's great curiosity behind it all for people. There'll be frustration too.
When you have the sports minister of the country coming out practically begging soccer clubs to apply for grants, and we'll do everything we can to help you, that's how far behind soccer had fallen at grassroots. And most of them
a portion of them can't even apply for those grants because they don't own their facilities.
They don't have their own facilities. Soccer is so far behind. I'm going to soccer matches now with my son. I wouldn't have had much experience of it, in Meath, but now we're on the circuit, and you go to 90% of the grounds where he's playing a match at the weekends, and the difference between that and the GA or rugby equivalents are frightening. Where you regularly pull up and you change at the side of the pitch, and there's no toilets or whatever, whereas people would not accept that if they were going to a GA match.
No,
that's how far behind the sport has fallen, and it happened because of what was going on in the FAI.
We're pretty much out of time. Is there any last piece you want to just give a nod to? We probably don't have time to get into it as such.
Can I just mention one, just a slight indulgence in the Sunday World in the news section? Just Roy Curtis paying tribute to a retired colleague, Vincent Hogan, who you had here recently. A nice reflective piece about the marching of time, and a few old journalists gathering for a farewell pint recently.
And Paul Kimmage's piece, I would say, the Sunday as well. It's John's own section, so we might mention it, but his piece about a sort of a family trip arising from the death of his mother. There's not much we can add to it other than to recommend it as a read.
No, it's great. I mean, he when his mother passed away, he has this sudden concern, will I become a stranger with my brothers? And so he cancels one plan and goes cycling in the Pyrenees with Kevin, his brother, and he details the trip, and so it's about their relationship and a family, I suppose, in that phase when the parents are suddenly gone and how relationships change. And then it's also him remembering cycling those same roads and now wondering, how the F did I ever do this? It's tougher than I remember. So I agree, well worth the read. Fellas, we're out of time. Thank you both so much. We had John Greene there, editor of the Sunday Independent Sports section, and Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Thanks, Mill. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.